In 1900, a Jewish family on the Lower East Side could eat all day on what spilled from a single pushcart for 15 cents. A penny herring, a penny pickle, a 2-cent loaf of black bread. That was supper, and nobody went hungry. But here is the strange part. Number 10 on this list was so cheap that immigrants ate it only because they had nothing else. And today it sells for $18 in the same neighborhood. And number 1 kept more families alive through a tenement winter than any doctor on Orchard Street ever did. Hit that subscribe button. Let us count down the 25 foods Jewish immigrants actually ate on New York's Lower East Side. Number 25, schmaltz herring. Before refrigeration reached the tenements, before anything came packaged, there was herring. The barrel kind, packed in salt so heavy it could survive a transatlantic crossing in a ship's hold without spoiling. A peddler would wheel his cart down Hester Street with a barrel of silver fish glistening in brine, and for 2 or 3 cents you walked away with supper. Schmaltz herring was the fattiest cut, the richest, the one immigrants prized most, because fat meant calories, and calories meant getting through a 14-hour day in a garment shop. You ate it the old country way, laid across a slab of black bread with a slice of raw onion, the oil soaking into the crumb until the bread tasted of the sea. It was cheap enough that a man earning $8 a week could afford it every single day. Russ and Daughters started exactly this way. One immigrant from Poland hawking herring off a pushcart until he saved enough to open a store in 1914. That fish built a dynasty. Number 24, sour pickles from the barrel. Walk down Essex Street in 1905, and the smell hit you a block away. Garlic, dill, and salt brine so sharp it cleared your sinuses. Jewish immigrants from Eastern Europe had been fermenting cucumbers in cellars for generations, because vinegar was expensive in the old country, but salt was cheap, and saltwater fermentation kept a vegetable edible through a brutal winter. On the Lower East Side, they turned that survival skill into a livelihood. A whole sour cucumber, fished dripping out of a wooden barrel with the peddler's bare hand, cost a single penny in the late 1800s and a nickel by the 1920s. You could get a half-sour, lighter, and still a little crunchy and green, or a full sour, soft and pungent, and almost translucent. By the 1920s, there were around 80 pickle vendors crammed into the neighborhood, an entire district they called Pickle Alley. A penny bought a snack, a vegetable, and a taste of home all at once. Number 23, black bread, rye, and pumpernickel. The bread these immigrants ate would startle a modern American. Dense, dark, sour. With a crust you had to tear rather than slice. A heavy rye or pumpernickel filled a stomach and stayed filling for hours, which mattered when you were burning energy at a sewing machine from dawn when past dark. A loaf cost 2 or 3 cents from the bakery on the corner, and there was a baker on nearly every corner because bread was the floor of the entire diet. Herring went on it, schmaltz was spread on it, pot cheese was piled on it. The heel of the loaf got dunked in soup until it softened. Nothing was thrown away. A family bought bread daily because they had no way to store much else, and the rhythm of that daily loaf, still warm, carried up 3 flights of stairs, was the rhythm of the whole neighborhood. Number 22, boiled potatoes. The potato was the immigrants' insurance policy. It cost almost nothing, a few cents for several pounds. It kept for weeks in a cool corner, and it filled a belly like nothing else. A woman feeding a family on a peddler's earnings could boil a pot of potatoes, mash them with a little schmaltz or a fried onion, and call it dinner. No meat required. On the nights when there was no money for anything else, and there were many such nights, boiled potatoes with salt and a raw onion was the meal that stood between a family and an empty table. The potato also became the foundation of half the famous dishes that followed. It filled the niche. It became the latke. It thickened the soup. Immigrants understood the potato in their bones because in Poland and Lithuania and Russia, it had already kept their grandparents alive through famines that killed millions. They brought that knowledge with them, and on the Lower East Side, it kept working. Number 21, pot cheese and sour cream. In a world before yogurt cups and string cheese, the dairy that immigrants ate was pot cheese, a loose, tangy, fresh curd somewhere between cottage cheese and farmer cheese, and the thick, sour cream that went with everything. A scoop of pot cheese on black bread was breakfast. Pot cheese with a sliced radish and a little salt was a light supper on a hot summer night when nobody wanted to light the coal stove. Sour cream got spooned over boiled potatoes, stirred into borscht, dolloped onto blintzes, and eaten by children straight off the spoon. It was cheap and filling, and crucially, under Jewish dietary law, it could never touch meat, which is why these dairy foods clustered into their own world of shops and their own kind of meal. A bowl of cold sour cream with cucumbers and a slice of bread was the taste of a Lower East Side July. Number 20, Bayal. Everyone knows the bagel, but the bagel's quieter cousin was just as beloved, and it came straight from one specific city. The Bayali is named for Bialystok, the Polish city whose Jewish immigrants brought it to New York, and you can still find the Bialystoker congregation those same immigrants founded. A Bayali is a soft, chewy roll with a flattened center, not a hole, filled with a smear of cooked onion and sometimes a few poppy seeds. Unlike the bagel, it is never boiled, only baked, which leaves it pillowy and tender rather than dense and shiny. Fresh from the oven, split and spread with a little butter or pot cheese, it was a breakfast a working family could afford. The Bayali never conquered America the way the bagel did, but on the old Lower East Side, it was every bit its equal. Number 19, bagels. Long before they came frozen in plastic bags, bagels were made by hand by union men in basement bakeries, and they were a genuinely different food. The dough was boiled first, then baked, which gave the real article a glossy, blistered crust and an interior so dense and chewy it could practically be used as a weapon. Immigrants had eaten them in the old country, dipped in goose fat or paired with herring. In New York, the bagel found its destiny. A fresh bagel cost a couple of cents and needed nothing else, though everything was about to change once the appetizing shops paired it with cream cheese and smoked fish. For the early immigrant, a bagel was simply good, cheap bread that lasted, that tasted like the place you came from. Number 18, hot RBs. Here is one almost nobody remembers. On the Lower East Side, especially around the Sabbath, a peddler would walk the streets with a steaming pot calling out for buyers, and what he was selling was RBs, hot chickpeas, also called nahit. Boiled, soft, drained, and dusted heavily with salt and a great deal of black pepper, they were sold by the cupful for pennies, eaten warm right there on the sidewalk out of a twist of newspaper. They were the popcorn of the immigrant Jewish street, the warm nosh you bought on a cold evening with the last coins in your pocket. A child given a paper cone of hot, peppery chickpeas on a freezing Friday night never forgot the warmth of it in cupped hands. It was the smallest possible luxury, and it cost almost nothing. Number 17, halva. For people who could rarely afford candy, halva was the great sweet indulgence, and it cost little enough that even tenement children could dream of it. Made from ground sesame seeds and sugar, halva came in dense, crumbly bricks, sometimes marbled with chocolate, sliced off a big slab at the candy store and sold by weight. It was rich and oily and intensely sweet. The kind of treat where a small piece went a long way, which was exactly the point for a family counting pennies. A few cents bought a wedge that a child could make last all afternoon, nibbling the edges, letting it melt into a paste on the tongue. It kept well, which made it perfect for an economy where nothing could be wasted and refrigeration was a luxury. The halva of the Lower East Side was the taste of the rare good day, the penny that did not have to go toward bread. First pattern break. Here is where you understand the whole world these foods came from. The Lower East Side around 1900 was the most densely packed place on the planet, with more than 700 people crammed into a single acre, families of 8 sharing 2 rooms with no hot water. Between 1880 and 1924, around 2.5 million Jews fled the pogroms and poverty of Eastern Europe, and roughly 3 out of 4 landed right here. So the food had to be cheap, it had to stretch, and much of it had to be bought already cooked from the street. The push cart was the engine of all of it. A peddler rose before dawn, paid a quarter to rent a cart for the day, and elbowed for a few feet of sidewalk among thousands of others. By 1900, 2,500 open-air vendors were working these streets. That push cart was how a man with nothing fed his family, and sometimes, if he was lucky and stubborn, how he saved enough to open a store and change his family's fortune forever. Number 16. Kasha varnishkis. Buckwheat groats, called kasha, were the cheap grain of the old country, and immigrants did not abandon them just because they had crossed an ocean. Toasted in a pan until nutty and fragrant, then simmered until tender, kasha had an earthy, almost smoky flavor that filled a plate for pennies. The genius move was combining it with varnishkis, little bow tie noodles, and binding the whole thing with plenty of schmaltz and a heap of fried onions cooked down until golden and sweet. The result was hearty enough to be a meal on its own, no meat required, which mattered in a household where meat appeared maybe once a week. It was the kind of food a grandmother made without measuring anything, by feel and by memory, and the smell of toasting buckwheat and frying onion was the smell of a kitchen doing the most with the least. Number 15. Schmaltz and gribinus. If there was one ingredient that defined the flavor of this entire cuisine, it was schmaltz, rendered chicken or goose fat, the immigrants' butter, their cooking oil, and their spread all in one. Since dietary law forbade mixing meat with dairy, you could not cook a chicken dish in butter, so the fat of the bird itself became the answer. A woman saved every scrap of chicken skin and fat, then rendered it slowly in a pan until it melted into liquid gold. She stored it in a jar and used it for everything. Schmaltz fried the latkes, enriched the kasha, spread on the bread, and bound the chopped liver. And the best part was the byproduct. As the fat rendered, the bits of skin and onion crisped up into gribenes, salty, crunchy, irresistible cracklings that were the original Jewish snack food. Children hovered around the stove waiting for them. A nickel chicken gave up its meat for the Sabbath, its fat for the week, and its cracklings for the kids, all from one bird. Number 14. Chopped liver. Chicken liver was nearly free. The butcher practically gave it away with a bird, and a thrifty immigrant cook knew exactly what to do with it. She sautéed the livers with a generous amount of onion and schmaltz, then chopped them, sometimes with a hard-boiled egg, until the whole thing came together into a rich, savory paste seasoned with nothing more than salt and pepper and the fat itself. The hand chopping mattered, done in a wooden bowl with a curved blade, because it left the texture coarse and rustic rather than smooth like a French pate. Piled on a slice of rye, chopped liver was how you turned the cheapest, most overlooked part of the chicken into something that tasted like wealth. Doctors today would note it is packed with iron and B vitamins, which a hardworking, often malnourished immigrant population badly needed. They did not know the science. They knew it was cheap, rich, and made the family feel cared for. Number 13, knishes. In 1890, an immigrant named Yonah Schimmel started selling baked dumplings from a pushcart on the Lower East Side, and by 1910 he had a storefront on Houston Street that is still there today, the oldest knishery in America. A real knish, the kind he made, was a fist-sized round of soft dough wrapped around a filling of mashed potato and onion, baked until golden, never fried, never square. For a few cents, a knish was a complete hot meal in your hand, dense and starchy and filling enough to power a man through an afternoon of labor. It was so woven into the neighborhood that no New York politician of that era got elected without posing for a photograph with a knish in his face, and Theodore Roosevelt himself stopped in for the kasha when he was police commissioner. The knish crossed every line because cheap and hot and filling is a language everyone speaks. Number 12, latkes. Fried potato pancakes were the taste of celebration and of getting by, both at once. Grate raw potato and onion, squeeze out the water, bind it with an egg and a little flour, and fry the patties in hot schmaltz until the edges turned lacy and brown. The smell of frying potato filled a tenement apartment and drew children to the kitchen like a magnet. Served with a spoon of cold sour cream or a little applesauce, latkes were both supper and treat, the dish that turned a few pennies of potato into something that felt like a feast, especially during the winter festival of lights when oil-fried food carried real meaning. The same kitchen logic produced the blintz, a thin pancake rolled around sweet pot cheese and fried in butter, the dairy cousin to the latke. Both were the cooking a mother did when she wanted her family to feel, for one evening, like they had plenty. Number 11, borscht. To most Americans, the word means a strange purple soup. But to the immigrants of the Lower East Side, borscht was a year-round staple that came in 2 seasons. In winter, it was hot, a deep crimson beet soup built up with cabbage and a scrap of meat into something hearty enough to be dinner. In summer, it transformed completely, served ice-cold straight from the icebox, brilliant magenta, with a boiled potato dropped in and a generous swirl of white sour cream marbling through it. That cold borscht was salvation on a sweltering August day in an apartment with no ventilation. Beets were cheap and they kept. Sour cream was always on hand, and the soup cost almost nothing to make in a big pot that fed the family for days. But it started here. A cheap root vegetable turned into something that could warm you in January and cool you in July. Second pattern break. Here is something that shaped every meal these people ate, and most Americans have never thought about it. Jewish dietary law forbids mixing meat and dairy in the same meal, even on the same plate, even with the same dishes. That single rule split the entire food economy of the Lower East Side in 2. On one side stood the delicatessen, the world of cured and smoked meats, the pastrami and corned beef and tongue, all kosher, all strictly meat. On the other stood the appetizing shop, an institution so particular to New York Jews that the word barely exists anywhere else, devoted to fish and dairy, the smoked salmon, the whitefish, the cream cheese, the herring. You did not buy your lox at the delicatessen, and you did not buy your pastrami at the appetizing. This was not arbitrary fussiness. It was a 1,000-year-old law that gave structure and dignity to people who had lost almost everything else, a way of staying who they were in a country that wanted to swallow them whole. Number 10, Lox and cream cheese on a bagel. Here is the dish I told you about at the start, the one that cost pennies then and sells for $18 now in the same few blocks. In the old country, salmon was something poor Jews rarely saw. In New York, cured salmon, lox, brined heavily in salt, was suddenly affordable, and the appetizing shops sliced it whisper thin to make a little go a long way. Pair that silky, salty, translucent fish with a smear of cool cream cheese. Layer it on a chewy boiled bagel, and you had created something that did not exist in Poland or Russia at all. It was invented right here, an American Jewish original born of cheap immigrant ingredients. For the immigrant family, it was a Sunday morning luxury that still came in under the price of a real meal. Today, it is the global symbol of New York itself, and it began as poor people stretching a little fish as far as it could go. Number 9. Smoked whitefish, chubs, and sable. Beyond the famous lox lay an entire universe of smoked and cured fish that the appetizing shops sold by the pound, and the immigrants knew every one. There was the golden smoked whitefish, its skin burnished bronze, the flesh flaking off in rich, smoky chunks. There were chubs, small smoked fish eaten almost whole. There was sable, also called smoked black cod, silky and oily, and considered the connoisseur's choice. A whole smoked whitefish fed a family and cost far less than fresh meat, and the leftover scraps got mashed into a salad that stretched the fish for another meal. Spread across a table on a Sunday, a platter of smoked fish in all its colors looked like abundance itself, even when the family making it had almost nothing in the bank. Number 8. Mamaliga. Not every Jewish immigrant came from Poland or Russia. A great many came from Romania, and they brought a dish their poorer neighbors back home had lived on, mamaliga, a thick cornmeal porridge nearly identical to Italian polenta. Cornmeal was among the cheapest foods a person could buy, and mamaliga was the Romanian Jewish answer to having almost nothing in the cupboard. Boiled with water and salt until it thickened into a dense golden mass, it was served soft like a porridge, or left to firm up and then sliced and fried the next day. The poor ate it plain. Those with a few more pennies topped it with pot cheese, sour cream, or a fried egg. In the Romanian corners of the Lower East Side, mamaliga was the taste of home, a humble yellow porridge carrying the memory of a whole other country. Number 7. Pastrami. Pastrami. The single most famous food to come out of this neighborhood was, remarkably, an immigrant solution to a preservation problem. Pastrami traces back to Romania, where Jews cured goose and beef to make it last, and the immigrants brought the technique to New York and applied it to cheap, tough cuts of beef. The meat was brined, then coated in a thick crust of pepper, coriander, and garlic, then smoked, then steamed until the toughest cut on the cow turned meltingly tender. Piled high on rye with a smear of mustard, never mayonnaise, never on white bread, a pastrami sandwich was a working man's feast. Katz's delicatessen, which traces its roots to 1888, was built on exactly this. What began as a thrifty method for stretching the worst cut of beef became, within a generation, the proudest sandwich in America, the thing people now wait in line for hours to eat in the very neighborhood where it was born out of necessity. Number 6. Corned beef and tongue. Right alongside the pastrami in every kosher delicatessen sat its cousins, corned beef and tongue, both products of the same immigrant instinct to take cheap, tough cuts and transform them through salt and thyme. Corned beef was beef brisket cured in a heavily salted brine, the corns being the coarse grains of salt, then boiled slowly until tender. Pickled tongue, cured the same way, was prized by those who knew, sliced thin and rich, a delicacy made from a part of the animal most Americans would not touch. Nothing on the cow went to waste. A delicatessen turned the cheapest, toughest cuts into sandwiches that working families saved up for, the treat at the end of a long week. Served on rye with mustard and a sour pickle on the side, a corned beef sandwich was the immigrants' idea of having made it, even just for an afternoon. It was poverty cooking dressed up in its Sunday best, and it tasted like a rival. Number 5, kishke. This is the one that makes modern eaters flinch, and it is pure old country thrift. Kishke, also called stuffed derma, started with a length of beef intestine, the casing, which the butcher would otherwise throw out. The cook scrubbed it clean and stuffed it tight with a cheap, filling mixture of flour or matzo meal, grated onion, carrot, and a heavy dose of schmaltz, then roasted it until the outside turned dark and crisp and the inside stayed soft and savory. Sliced into thick rounds, it was rich, oniony, and deeply comforting, the kind of food that stuck to your ribs through a cold night. The whole dish existed for one reason. A poor family that had managed to get a little meat was not about to let the casing go to waste, so they filled it with cheap pantry staples and stretched one purchase into 2 dishes. It was the whole philosophy of immigrant cooking packed into a single, humble sausage. Third pattern break. Here is what every dish from now on has in common. They are the foods of the Sabbath, and the Sabbath was the whole point. 6 days a week, these people labored in sweatshops and pushed carts and bent over sewing machines for pennies. But from Friday sundown to Saturday sundown, the law commanded rest, and no observant Jew would so much as light a fire. That single rule shaped an entire cuisine, because if you could not cook on the Sabbath, you had to cook everything the day before and find ways to keep it warm or serve it cold. So the best food of the week, the chicken, the fish, the slow-cooked stew, the braided bread, all of it appeared on the Sabbath table, no matter how poor the family. A woman who fed her children potatoes and herring all week would somehow find the money for a chicken on Friday, because the Sabbath demanded dignity. These were not just recipes. They were the one day a week when a tenement family got to feel like human beings instead of machines. Number 4, kolent, the cleverest dish in the entire tradition, born directly from the law against cooking on the Sabbath. Kolent is a thick, slow stew of beans, barley, potatoes, and a cheap cut of fatty meat, all layered into a heavy pot. The cook assembled it on Friday afternoon and set it over the lowest possible heat, or in the old neighborhood, carried it to the local baker who let it sit overnight in his oven's residual warmth. Through the night and into Saturday it cooked, the beans growing creamy, the meat falling apart, the potatoes melting into the broth, the whole thing turning deep brown and impossibly tender. By Saturday lunch it was ready, a hot, hearty meal that required no cooking on the holy day at all. A poor family could build it almost entirely from beans and barley, the meat a small splurge for flavor. Often a kugel, a baked noodle or potato pudding, or a sweet tzimiz of carrots and prunes cooked right alongside it. It was law and economy and comfort fused into one steaming pot, the Sabbath solved. Number 3, gefilte fish. Few dishes are as misunderstood today, and fewer were as practical in their time. Gefilte fish solved 2 problems at once for an observant immigrant cook. Fresh fish was full of bones, and the Sabbath law against separating bones from food made eating a whole fish at the table genuinely difficult. So cooks ground the cheapest available freshwater fish, often carp, pike, or whitefish, mixed it with onion, egg, and a little matzo meal, shaped it into oval patties, and poached them gently in a fish broth. The bones were gone, The expensive fish was stretched with cheap filler to feed a whole family, and the result could be made Friday and served cold on Saturday. Served chilled with a fiery dab of beet horseradish that cleared your sinuses, gefilte fish was the traditional first course of the Sabbath meal in nearly every Ashkenazi home. It tasted of patience and of the old country, mild and savory and cool. The name itself means filled fish, a reminder of when the mixture was stuffed back into the fish skin. It was thrift and law and tradition poached into a single pale oval. Number 2, the EGG cream and 2 cents plain, not a food but a drink, and you cannot tell this story without it. The Lower East Side ran on seltzer, fizzy carbonated water that immigrants adopted with such devotion they called it Jewish champagne. The tenements had bad water and the neighborhood was, in one writer's words, addicted to the stuff, with dozens of soda fountains crammed into a few blocks and seltzer men delivering heavy glass siphon bottles to homes alongside the milkman and the iceman. A plain glass of seltzer cost 2 cents, and that price became its name, 2 cents plain, later the title of a famous memoir of growing up poor here. For 1 extra penny, you got the Prince of Drinks, the EGG cream, which, despite its name, contains neither egg nor cream. It was just cold milk, seltzer, and a squirt of chocolate syrup, stirred fast until it foamed up white at the top like beaten egg whites. For 3 cents, a tenement child got something that tasted like pure luxury, sweet and cold and fizzing on the tongue. It was the cheapest joy in the neighborhood, and to this day, it tastes like the place that invented it. Number 1, chicken soup with matzo balls. At the top of the list sits the dish that did more than feed people. It healed them, comforted them, and connected them to everyone who had ever made it before. A whole chicken, simmered for hours with carrots, celery, onion, and parsnip until the broth turned golden and the meat fell from the bone, was the centerpiece of the Sabbath table and the medicine of choice for every illness in the tenement. They called it Jewish penicillin, and they were not entirely wrong, because a hot bowl of nourishing broth was often the only thing a sick, exhausted, malnourished person could keep down. Into that broth went the matzo balls, nidlock, fluffy dumplings of matzo meal, egg, and schmaltz that swelled soft and tender in the pot, soaking up the chicken's flavor from the inside. Sometimes kreplach, little meat-filled dumplings, floated there instead. A braided loaf of challah sat alongside, the rich egg bread that crowned every Sabbath. For a family that ate herring and potatoes 6 days a week, the Friday chicken was the splurge that mattered most, because the bird gave its meat for the soup and its fat for the week. When a mother set a steaming bowl of golden broth in front of a child in a cold tenement, she was doing more than feeding him. She was telling him he was worth the whole chicken. That is why, 100 years and 1,000 miles later, the smell of chicken soup still means home to people whose great-grandparents are long gone. Here is my challenge. Make one of these this week, just one. The chopped liver, the latkes, the cold borscht, the chicken soup with matzo balls. Then come back and tell me whether your great-grandmother was just being sentimental or whether she actually knew how to turn pennies into a feast. Drop the one you are going to make in the comments. I want to know if the egg cream gets more love than the knish, and whether anyone out there still keeps a jar of schmaltz in the refrigerator the way the old neighborhood did. Because these were never just foods, they were a whole world carried across an ocean in a single suitcase, and somebody should remember it.